I think the eventual target you want to hit is at least 2 hours in the morning of like most important work, and then another 2 hours in the afternoon. That's only 4 hours. Everybody I know that does 4 hours on like whatever's most important every single day is very successful. And you replan weekly, and sometimes you're wrong, and you go down a rabbit hole and it doesn't work or whatever, and that's fine. That's part of the game. But if as long as you do 10 minutes, you've got a placeholder in your life, and things keep moving forward, and you keep looking at it. It's when you take 2 weeks off, suddenly things are getting dusty. You're going to have to reorient to the problem space. You don't remember what you're going to do. If you reached out to some people, hey, you kind of sort of interested in this, and you take 2 weeks to reply to them, they're not interested anymore. You do 10 minutes. Okay, what's most important? Man, I really should reply to that guy in this space. I wrote to him. He's very gracious to write back. I should reply. It's been 2 days, right? You put in your 10 minutes. I really think, I actually don't think it's possible for a person, in a modern, Western country that's like doing reasonably okay, right? Like to put in 10 minutes a day on what's most important and repick what's most important and stick with that. Not like working hard, but like most important. That will grow. Like if you just reliably do 10 minutes, you'll do more than 10 minutes really quickly. And once you get up to a couple hours or more, like you do that, you're going to be pretty successful. You're going to at least be more successful every single year than the year you were before, if you're picking at all correctly what's most important, which you can learn and improve at that too. And then putting the time in. And people just get busy and don't do what's important, and then they just don't get what they want.
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com. Sebastian, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Once more into the breach, dear friends. We're back. We're doing it. It's exciting.
Well, what prompted this conversation is the fact that, we had you as a guest when we were called Blogcast FM, and somehow the conversation that I had with you kept resurfacing on Twitter over the years. So I thought, it only made sense to bring you back for a second round and subject you to my crazy questions. So on that note, I want to start by asking you, what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a little kid, and how did that end up impacting the choices that you've made with your life and your career?
Yeah, I want to be a scientist, actually. And I always just thought science was really, really cool. And, you start to learn actually what science is. When you're a little kid, you think, I don't know, I watch Looney Tunes with Bugs Bunny and like the idea of science, and they're like mixing stuff in test tubes, and it's very theatrical, right? But I always thought that was super cool. I always thought NASA was super cool. And, similar to you, and I remember you saying in one of your shows that, you said something along the lines of like, I'm a failed byproduct of the education systems. Like there wasn't anything for me to do. So I went and did entrepreneurship. No, I really feel the same way. I really feel the same way because, I looked at both science and I looked at law. And, both of them, you just really needed to do, with law, you're talking 7 years before you're getting a JD, and then can start to do associate work. And then you're doing interesting stuff in law in 12 years, 15 years, right?
Yeah.
Typically, or at least that's what it was like when I was coming up. Maybe it's a little better now. And same with science, where it was like the amount of time you would spend, when I actually just really looked into it, the amount of time you would spend, especially if you go to graduate school and you're like, being a research assistant and TA in classes, like you can't just like jump in and do science. And then we had the internet where you could just do whatever you want. And, you could, everything's changing so fast that I'm like, this is cool. I want to do stuff. And I was, you call me, you can put me in a failed byproduct of the education system club, if we have one of those. Because, I was just like, I can't wait around. I can't, I'm not into this. I want to go out and do some stuff and build some stuff and make some stuff happen. But I think I did bring that scientist love of the world and wanting to understand the world. And like Richard Feynman is still like a huge hero of mine. And you learn about how people like, Einstein went about and he's looking at the clocks and that kind of thing is really still really neat to me and really moves me. And I do try to bring that like love of truth and experimentation and taking notes and kind of figuring out how the gears and the clocks move. That's still a big part of, what I try to do really every single week.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll get into detail about all of that. I'm curious. I'd like to hear a bit more detail about your actual formal education, just because I'm curious kind of, why you also felt that you're a failed byproduct of that system? And then the other question is, I think often, you mentioned the fact that there's, 12 years to doing anything interesting in law, all these years before you get to do anything interesting as a scientist. And I was just writing about this morning because I'm reading this book again called Not Fade Away by a guy named Peter Barton. And he talks about living life in a straight line or versus living fully. And often those two things are, not necessarily mutually exclusive, but one can get in the way of the other. And I'm curious what you think it is that causes certain people to be so hell-bent on following, the sort of straight line path versus those who actually can endure the uncertainty of, a path that isn't necessarily laid out in front of them.
Well, that's great. Let's jump on the last point and let's have a little dialogue on this because I really want to hear what did you want to be when you were growing up?
Boy, so many different things. It continually changed. So when I was 4 or 5, we were in India at one point, and I was staying at one of my mom's uncle's houses, and there was a airport out in front where they trained pilots. And to this day, I still think watching an airplane take off, especially a 747, is like the most majestic creation of man. Like, there's just something beautiful about watching it. There's a place in San Francisco, right by SFO, there's a restaurant called Kincaid's, and right across the street from Kincaid's is the water, and from the water you can watch airplanes take off, and there's just something awesome about it. There's this, you just feel this sense of adventure watching it. So when I was 5, I wanted to be a pilot. For some time, I thought I wanted to be a doctor, but that largely was not really my own doing. I think it was because of the environment I was in. I saw a lot of these India doctors driving Mercedes and living great life, living in big houses. I thought, okay, yeah, I want that. I was like, and I realized, I said, I didn't want the doctor part. I just wanted the houses and the cars.
Sure.
But, I think by the time I started college, I didn't have really any concept of it. I think it was very vague. Like, I thought I would be a business major. I ended up as an econ major. I went into sales because it was the only job that had the potential for a really high payday that wasn't investment banking or management consulting. And, like looking back, so I can't necessarily say, and there was a point in high school at which I did want to be a writer, a goal that I gave up on until much later in life. So that, hopefully kind of answers your question.
So were your parents terrified when you became an entrepreneur? Were they like, what the heck are you doing? You're ruining your life. We worked so hard and you seemed like you were on the right track and now what are you doing? We don't understand it. Did you get that or did you not? 'Cause a lot of people get that.
I got a little bit of that. I mean, I got the whole, build your empire on the side and have a real job at the same time. And to the point where, I almost did quit. And I finally, I think this was like the end of 2014 where my life was basically falling apart. But I told my parents, give me another year, and if things haven't turned around by then, I'll go look for a real job. And coincidentally, I got the book deal that year, and everything has been not smooth sailing, but yeah, I mean, of course, I don't think that there's especially because my sister is a doctor,
Okay, all right. So you got a little air cover from her. It's like, all right, at least one of our kids will be respectable.
Yeah.
Like at least one of them will go on and do something that makes us proud. So I really think, as crazy as this sounds, because I experienced this from my parents, who are lovely people and are wonderful people, and they really wanted the best for me. So like some people are like, no, my parents, it's like, no, I had a little bit of that when I was younger, and they were like, what are you doing? And I was like, no, you don't understand me, mom and dad. No. But I get it. Parents really want the best for their children. And, my good friend, and I dropped out of 2 high schools and then I went to college and I still got a scholarship to college. I figured out a way to make it work. And I was able to get to college and they're like, all right, he's all right. And then I dropped out to like go do stuff. And they're like, no. And eventually I went back and finished my undergraduate. I'm a big believer in education and it's like not the worst thing in the world for a young person to do if they don't know what else to do. You get around an environment, you get an opportunity to get exposure, different ideas, meet some people. It kind of gives you a way to tell other people what you're doing that makes sense. And this is way before entrepreneurship was cool and the Mark Zuckerberg movie or whatever, right?
Right.
But, I've seen this, my close friend, my business partner at Ultra Working, and we've worked on so many charity projects in education. We've done a lot in education, work with a lot of top universities. Kai Zhao, Kai was born in northern China, and he immigrated, with his parents, and his dad's a scientist and does really cool, really like cutting edge science, like material science research, like really cool stuff. And when he dropped out of college to get into entrepreneurship and sales, actually, Kai did sales. I wound up doing some sales at some point. It's quite common, or like, what can we do with no skills and a lot of willpower and nothing else, right? And it's like, well, there's a field that a lot of people burn out in. They're always looking for new people to see if you can handle it for more than 5 minutes. His parents freaked out. My parents freaked out. If your parents didn't freak out, then bless them. That's way more than most people can have. And I really think, when you go off on your own, especially in modern culture, we don't have to go fight wars. We're not like those young boys from the cornfields. They were sending to storm the guns at Normandy and roll the Nazis back. We didn't have to go serve in Vietnam. If you enlisted, you could do that, but we haven't had the draft. We haven't had to like hit the wall. It's not like the Great Depression. My grandmother told me stories about having to go steal tomatoes from a farm to not starve, right? We didn't have any of that like grow up fast stuff. So we get like 17, 18, 19. I'm not sure that we're totally adults. Now, hey, maturity is about like having unique life experiences and synthesizing them. So maybe there's some young listeners out here. I'm not hating. I'm a big believer that the young people can do whatever they want and what they set their mind to. But a lot of people go off to college. They don't know what they want. And they're like, man, this just isn't working for me. And when I envision like, I don't want to be here for 4 years and then getting a job for 4 years and whatever. And your folks are like looking at you and you're like, look, just stick with it. It works. It's like proven. But that's even becoming less true. So if you're keeping your head up and you're looking around, you're seeing, hey, I'm seeing people that are in like safe careers getting laid off. I'm seeing people that go to, every major except engineering, computer science, graduate from school and go work at Starbucks. You're like, this doesn't look good, man. I got to find something better. This isn't good. So people look around. They look for what's meaningful for them. They don't see that certainty. I really do think, if you're not fully your own person that's had, a bunch of, experiences and synthesize them, you don't know exactly what you want. But it's easy enough to look at that and say, I don't want that. And then, your family's like, look, just do it. Just trust it. It's fine. We did it. It works. Maybe that's changing a little bit. 10 years ago, this was very much the case. And, I really think a big reason that people don't do it is because, if you're coming from a middle class family, a working class family, they worked hard to like give you a decent life. It was like a better life than they had, your parents. And they're like, just go do this and trust us. And like, you're not really sure about exactly what you want, Like if a kid gets a scholarship to play athletics at a very high level or gets on the Olympic team, people are like kind of like, all right, I get that. But if you're like, I don't know what I want, but I kind of think I don't want that. Your parents are like, just do it, trust us, it worked. I can see why a lot of people listen. You love your family, you want to like do right by them. Sometimes that's a great shame though. I mean, like what you're doing, Srini, where you're reaching so many people, thousands of people, and you're changing their lives. You're getting these amazing stories and guidance out of people. I'm sure you would have been a fine, physician or pilot, but like you're doing something like super cool that can grow to like infinity, and really like nobody else would have done, like at least not the same way for sure. And like I think that is, it's a tough thing when people are trying to decide between like, I don't know exactly what I want. I could step off into the abyss, which is terrifying. Or like people are telling me this is a safe path and I should stick with it that I love and I trust and like they're on my side. Yeah. I get why people like stay on the path.
It's interesting because I think a lot about sort of social programming and how social programming impacts our choices and how I think, one of the common patterns I've seen between people who have really interesting careers is an ability to overcome their social programming or ignore it altogether or even change it. So I'm actually curious, that raises a question of based on your sort of life experience, how do you change social programming, especially as somebody who, in a lot of ways completely ignored it? Like dropping out of high school is really very much ignoring a social program.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a great question. So I'm going to take this a little bit kind of out in space a little bit, and then I'll bring it back down. So one thing that's been very, very interesting for me that I've been looking into and studying, because I'm doing a lot more hiring, I'm doing a lot more interviewing, I'm connecting with a lot more people, I'm needing to size people up quickly. So I'm reading the literature on it, I'm getting to know people and what they do and how they act. And a couple of things that I've come across lately have been very interesting. I've also been doing some athletic training. And one thing that's very, very interesting is, you think or presume that other people think the same way you do, right? And they kind of do, right, to some extent. But actually, people are having very different internal experiences all the time. And Myers-Briggs actually does a decent job of capturing this. People say it's not fully scientifically vetted. These two women, I think they're like sisters or mother and daughter or some such, just came up with it based on Jung. But people look at it and go, actually, it's pretty accurate. And a lot of organizations do the Myers-Briggs type indicator to see like, hey, what are we dealing with? One of the most interesting things in Myers-Briggs, and they've seen this in a bunch of other fields, the amount that you're in your kind of your mental head or you're perceiving out into the world, and the amount that you're in your body versus in your mind, kind of, and like, pardon me if I'm a little out in space, but we'll try not to, actually varies from person to person, right? So like, a classical example of this would be like, take the famous mathematician Paul Erdős, like wrote more math papers than anyone in history, amazing guy, hero of mine. He was like totally had that like nutty professor, like is wearing his right shoe on his left foot stereotype about him. And it was like totally true. Like he couldn't open a carton of juice correctly. There's stories of his friends of him mangling a carton of juice because he was so in his own head. Like he wasn't like his relative emphasis and perception on what his hands are doing was lower than it is for most people. And, I would say to the listeners here, probably some people are listening when they're in the gym, probably some people are commuting. Some percentage of people are like listening and they're like drilled into this and it's percolating thoughts. They're thinking about their childhood. They're thinking about like, where am I doing? What am I doing? And like those people might be noticing less, like what posters are on the wall in the gym? Like what color is the ceiling? Some people notice those details and just like are locked into all of them. And they have a really like they're perceiving a lot. They're taking in a lot from the environment. And some people are like really in their own head and dealing with a lot of abstractions. Likewise, I think there's also some genetic tendency that you can train against for like levels of how much approval you need and how painful it is to get rejected. I think it varies from person to person. Training can get you over it and it can change you, but I think it's actually really good to understand your baseline, just like we all have slightly different body types. Some people are naturally very skinny. That's like great and their friends envy them. They can eat junk food and not get fat, but maybe they have a hard time putting on muscle, right? Some people have a little slower metabolism. Maybe they lift weights, they put on a lot of muscle, and that's great for them. They don't watch what they eat, they get heavy, right? Likewise, I think we have all some innate baselines, mix of genetics and culture, as to how much rejection hurts. How much are you in your own head and how much are you out in the world? And I think people, I'm pretty sure this is true from everything I look at. I think people that are out in the world more, they notice their surroundings more. They notice what other people think more. They notice how other people are dressed versus not paying attention to it, like a stereotypical nerd or a stereotypical geek or and I'm a nerd and a geek, so I'm into all that, But like those people that are noticing out in the world, how are other people dressed? How are other people groomed? Are they happy or not? Right? I think are more sensitive to getting rejected twice. First, because they notice disapproval more and they're like out there looking at the world to figure out what's going on. Right? And second, because they haven't built up as much of an inner world of like, I got this idea for a business and I'm like pretty sure it's good and there's like a need for it and like other people don't see it, but I see it in my head, right? And when you have that, it doesn't exist. And you got parents that are very practical. And you're like, Mom and Dad, I have an idea for a business. I'm going to do this thing with like a podcast and a conference. And they're like, what are you talking about? Please get a medical degree. Please become an MD, please. Like hang it. You can't hang this and put it on the wall, what you're talking about. And I can't see it. And like, I know what a doctor looks like. And this doesn't look like a doctor to me. Right. So, I think people that are naturally, weirdly, the people that are naturally less in their own heads have a harder time breaking from conforming. They notice more. Like if they're sitting on the floor of a rundown place, they're like, I'm a failure. Look at this room I'm in. I'm in a ratty, rundown, terrible room. I have no money. My clothes are turning into rags. I'm a failure. Whereas like the mathematician, the Paul Erdős is like, I've got this math that I'm working on. It's beautiful. Or the nascent entrepreneur is like, I got this idea. Or the artist is like, man, if I could just get this what I have in my head on the canvas that I'm trying to paint. That gives you a lot more ability to kind of persevere and to keep faith and hope. Though at the end of the day, it is skills and training and systems and stuff. Anybody can move in whatever direction they want. It just might be a different challenge. It might be a little harder or a little easier.
Okay. We'll talk about the skills, training, and systems piece because that now I'm starting to sort of have flashbacks to our last conversation about this. But before we get there, I want to ask about dropping out of high school and kind of how that has formed your views on education and what you think as somebody who has done work related to education. Like, what does the future of education look like in your mind?
Man. Well, okay. So, I actually work with some people at universities. We have a wonderful partnership that's going into the third year now with the University of Chicago. So we're actually running an entrepreneurship 2.5 weeks live, summer.givegetwin.com. People can check it out. It's 100% free if you're selected. It's pretty competitive. We get a few hundred people applying, and we take the top 20, and it's pretty intense. So don't feel bad if you don't get in. Like, a lot of really good people apply, but it's pretty neat. And so we go and we run some programming at U Chicago. The whole thing is live at U Chicago. It's free to attend, but like we take, like, it's pretty selective, as just math would say. I talk with people at universities, and I talk with some departmental heads, and sometimes we work with head of entrepreneurship or whatever. The Polsky Exchange at U Chicago is wonderful. They're the most wonderful people in the world. U Chicago really gets it, and it's really dialed in. The idea of like classical liberal arts without career outcomes is now rapidly becoming unpalatable to really to parents more than anything, I would say. Right. So you see in the U.S. News and World Rankings for colleges, schools that have tech programs and that get people into really great jobs are going up the rankings. And that's U Chicago, MIT, Stanford are just going up fast. And I won't name names, but you could look it up. Places that are not necessarily generating career outcomes are going down. Now, some people in education think, well, that's terrible. Like, there should be an institution of learning. This is not a vocational school. And that's one point of view. Another point of view is like, well, that's what people want. Like, we better make sure that they can do something after college. Because, if you get a degree in economics, but then you're working at Starbucks and like, you don't want to be working at Starbucks. I'm not hating on anyone working at Starbucks. That's great. But if like, that's not what you wanted to do, a lot of people get really unhappy. They feel like, I've been a little bit misled by society. As for dropping out of high school, that was so long ago. I don't even really identify with it anymore. I got bored. Mm-hmm. I got bored. I was a straight A student when I paid attention. And I was just bored. I would like figure this stuff out. This is boring. So like I did pretty well in school and extracurriculars when I cared. And then this is just boring. And I would go to the university computer lab and screw around on computers. And I would like dress up a little bit so I look like a university student. I thought I was being all sneaky and like nobody cares. Like, that's the funniest thing, right? So I would go to university and I go to computer lab like, I hope they don't know that I'm a high school student. And I just sit down and mess around on computers. And this is, back when, what was this, like 15, 16 years ago? So like, this is when, if you had like good internet, not dial up, like, I was always trying to get those like free AOL discs that they would email you and just like, I didn't have any money. I didn't have a debit card. Right. Uh-huh. So I was like, I was like, oh man, those discs were like, oh man, I want to get on the internet. And then, my folks would be like, why are you screwing up the phone line? And, like, after a while, they let me have my own phone line, which was really cool of them. And then I could run the internet, right? Which is like, like AOL 6 and stuff. And, it was back in the day, the Dell computer. This is like way before like the internet. This is like, I don't think Wi-Fi existed at that point. It might have, but like nobody had it if it did. I'm pretty sure it didn't. Like, laptops were rare, right? So, it was like right around that time. And I was like, man, computers are cool. I go to the cafe and like, kids don't do tobacco. Tobacco's the worst thing on the planet, but I'd smoke cigarettes and play chess. Quitting cigarettes was really hard. Don't ever smoke. It's not cool. It's terrible. It'll kill you. But I'd like smoke cigarettes and play chess. And I thought it was cool. And it wasn't cool. I was an idiot, but like, I thought it was cool. And so like, I was into chess and conversations and like computers and like I understood algebra pretty quickly and I was bored. So I left. I think you're seeing a lot more outlets. For people that want to do that. I think the internet's actually a godsend because you can self-learn, and there's nothing stopping you if you're a high school student from setting up your own blog or starting to do your own projects. You can go on a DeviantArt and upload visual art. You could start a podcast relatively trivially and upload it. Like, it'll probably be bad, but that's okay. Everybody's first everything is bad, and you just take it down later when you make a better thing. You go on YouTube and just record what you're doing. Like, that's so amazing that people can actually do meaningful things. And there's not gatekeepers, and they're not like, just show me the degree, and that means that you showed up for 4 years in a row. And we'll hire you, and then we'll make a 6-month bet on training you, and you won't actually be productive or profitable for our company for 6 months, but we figure we'll have you for like 5 years. So we'll like train you on the job after you've shown that you can like be there for 4 years in a row and keep getting it done. I think that's changing. I think the biggest thing that's there but not there is people don't realize all the resources. People don't realize all the resources that are there for them. Most universities now, at least a lot of them that I've seen, actually have really cool things happening on campus that you can go to. There's always a few cool clubs. There's always a few cool hackathons and entrepreneurship programs. And like, breaks my heart. There's things like Startup Weekend. It breaks my heart that people don't know about these and don't go to them. Just like go and see if you like it. Do you know what I mean? Like, everybody should try out a few different sports enough to see if they click with them. Everybody should just play around with some circuits and Arduino boards, and like everybody should try to write a few lines of code, and everybody should try a couple rounds of public speaking, and then whichever ones click, you can like go learn those in real time. And it's never been easier. It's so easy, but people like unless you get a mentor, and that's how it works out for most people, a really great professor or one of your parents is really into like, hey, look, you got to always be responsible for your own education and be trying things and whatever, or like a really cool uncle or an older brother or sister, you know. In the absence of that, people just don't realize that they can just like learn things and do things. It's never been easier to learn anything you want and connect with anyone you want. And there's so many great things out there. But like, I think our generation will raise our kids better and expose them to a ton of stuff because like we went through it and we know how to do it. But like, I still think for 10, 15 more years, you know, sometimes they're just people aren't getting guidance from the people in the generation above ours that like, you can learn all this stuff. It's amazing. You can produce whatever you want, but like, get on it, please.
Wow. So tell me about the sort of trajectory of your career, kind of, you know, leaving college to doing everything that you've done today. Like, what have been the most sort of significant inflection points, and what have you learned from each one of them?
Great question. So, I mean, it's so many different things. If I was to pick the one, like I would narrow down on one of them that might be like very informative, so it's not just like a bunch of random data points. Writing is one that I'm now like loving where I'm at as a writer. I now write, do the math, a couple 100,000 words a year while running a company and a pretty innovative nonprofit, and like don't have much of a social life, but some semblance of one, and like keeping healthy. I think writing might not be a bad comp. Because for a long time, like you, Srini, I wanted to be a writer. I thought writing was really cool. I thought it was really important. But I was only able to write for a long time when I was inspired. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't able to write methodically.
So I don't know about you, but vacuuming is not one of those things that I ever look forward to doing. But as you know, your environment has a huge impact on your creativity. So I still like it to be clean wherever I'm living and working. But now it doesn't have to be something that you deal with. If you're like me and you grew up in the 80s, you probably fantasized about the day when cleaning your house would be like it was for the Jetsons, meaning you don't have to lift a finger. Well, the good news is that we're already kind of living in that future. And the easiest way to make sure your floors are clean every day is with the iRobot Roomba Robot Vacuum. It cleans up after itself. The Clean Base automatic dirt disposal takes convenience to a new level, automatically empties its own bin into an allergen lock bag that holds 60 days of debris and traps 99% of pollen, mold, and dust mites, so you can forget about vacuuming for months at a time. Let the Roomba clean for you instead. It learns your home, finds dirt, and empties itself on its own. It's got powerful cleaning performance made effortless. Remember, if it's not from iRobot, it's not a Roomba. To learn more, go to irobot.com/unmistakable.
I don't know. Did you experience this? Why didn't you write for a long time?
Yeah. I mean, well, it's so funny because, you know, I think this is going to be a perfect setup for what I want to spend a lot of time talking about, which is systems and sort of structure and looking at sort of what you learn from science. But yeah, I mean, a big part of it was this idea of being inspired. It was sporadic. I also didn't, you know, I think part of it was not having an outlet necessarily. The fact that, you know, suddenly I had a blog and could publish the thoughts made a big difference. As opposed to, you know, doing it in a vacuum. Like when I was doing it in a vacuum, what was interesting is I would have these sort of bursts where, you know, right after college, I wrote a 63-page, you know, single-spaced autobiography in 8 days. But there's nothing I could do with that. When I got fired from my first job, I wrote a 20-page story about the experience of working at that job. And, you know, as tempted as I was to submit it to the San Jose Mercury News, I thought there are a lot of other people who work there. This might actually be bad for them if I did that. So out of, you know, respect for the people who work there, I resisted submitting it, but I'm sure I have it somewhere in all my files.
Yeah, I bet that'd be a riot to go back and skim and see how far you've come. But yeah, no, it's the same way. You know, Nietzsche wrote Thus Spake Zarathustra in 3 one-day bursts, just like manic bursts, just 3 24-hour periods. So yeah, that inspired burst thing was the same. I was able to do that, and it didn't get published, and it didn't aggregate. Aggregation is something I think about all the time, which is, you know, a friend of mine, a Jewish guy, he puts it. He says, "Don't tell me how hard you work. Tell me what you've got to show for it." Mm-hmm. Right? Which is kind of about aggregation. And for me, for a long time, I would get an inspired burst and I would work really hard on something. But like, man, my dead file of stuff that's 80 to 95% complete on writing just kept going up every single year. And like, that was really bad. Like, just that would never add up to anything. Right. And I think that's a problem that a lot of people have when they're getting into creativity is like, all right, like I started blogging. And when I made the commitment to writing every single day on my blog, and I did that for literally every single day for, I don't know, 3-4 years. And like, yeah, eventually, like you just get better. Even then, I didn't know how to improve the quality. That was just kind of like, I will write something. And I forced myself to do that. I wasn't able to write like essays that I was proud of or books reliably in that time period. Sometimes it'd be good. And I'd be like, why'd that happen? Man, I should start feeling like that again next time. Is it the cafe I was at? Go to the same cafe? Nope. And I think that's a thing that a lot of people that are more creative driven, even if they're entrepreneurs, like there's some entrepreneurs that approach entrepreneurship kind of like a engineer or like an accountant. And I say that in the most glowing, respectful, like I think it's great. It's a pretty reliable way to succeed when you just like put blocks down. But for the people that like approach things more like let me just like find the magic here. Where's the thread? Like, how do I really get inspired and get in the zone? Yeah, it's very easy to not be inspired and just to grind to a halt and have everything die. And that really sucks. And that was me for years. That was me for years before I started writing every day. Even then, I couldn't reliably produce anything good, which like that kind of sucks when you're doing that for years. And after a while, you know, some of my things went front page on Hacker News and other sites. And I got on things like Boing Boing and Lifehacker. And these were like some of the biggest sites on the internet at that point. This is before Facebook and Twitter were as big as they are, and there were still these big aggregations that were so important. And sometimes 100,000 people would check it out, but I didn't know what to do with that. Like, it didn't really ever lead to anything. You know, it was cool. Like, I'd meet some people. It was neat. But, you know, 2-3 years in, it was like happening, but like, yeah, right? And, you know, making the shift to, you know, I guess what's Pressfield call it going pro, that's a game changer when you can do that. And then when you start to be able to not lose the magic is great. If you want to make magic, if you've got that like Walt Disney characteristic about you, the ability to keep it, and you've definitely got this Srini. I see the magic, the elements of the magic all over the place. I believe Mars Dorian is a mutual friend of ours. I believe he's your illustrator, right? Yeah, he's a very unique style. He's got the magic.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he doesn't do the album covers, but a good amount. Any special project, Mars is pretty much a go-to guy.
I mean, Mars is a wonderful guy, and he's got the magic. He's like got the magic, right? So like once you can have the magic systematically and you can improve your technique and your craft and your production without losing the spark, keeping the magic, you could do some special things.
Okay, well, I think that makes a perfect setup. It's almost a bizarre coincidence that this is what we're talking about, because this morning, as I was writing, working on my second book, and I suddenly had an idea for a Medium post because I'd been stuck. I hadn't had anything, you know, in terms of an idea for a Medium post for 2 weeks. I was like, this is annoying. And then I came to this realization. I said, oh my God, I'm like, having a system is essential for creative output of any kind. Without a system, you're basically shooting in the dark. So I'm curious, so what I want to look at this is through a couple of lenses. You know, you said that you were writing without getting any better, but then you sort of systematically stumbled upon, you know, you figured out how to systematize magic. So I'm curious kind of how that sort of scientist background, your interest in science, has applied to all of this and dissecting it, and how you've developed your own systems for creativity and output.
Absolutely. So I could come at this from a few different places. Well, let's come at it from the abstract and then get really concrete. So there's a wonderful guy named Bob Posen. He wrote a book called Extreme Productivity. And Posen is a professor at Harvard Business School. And after the financial crash, he rewrote a bunch of securities law. He's a lawyer. And I think he was the head of Fidelity Investments for a while, which is unusual for a lawyer to become the head of a company, or he was at least very important there. And he did a ton of things. In Extreme Productivity, he like just listed out like, here's the mechanics of writing well. And he suggests, I'd already been working for a long time to try to improve craft, but Posen was kind of like the last piece that I needed. He says break your writing into three or to four separate steps, where you do a brainstorming, an outlining, a writing, and an editing, revising. And you don't intermix them. So you just reliably do it. Now, if somebody was to read the book, I recommend it. It's great. Here's what I tell everybody that I recommend this to, is you will get slower and be worse at writing and less creative, and it'll be frustrating for between 20 and 100 hours. So like that's the downside. Like it's kind of like somebody with bad mechanics at baseball with like great athletic ability, like would be better if they were like swinging the bat in a more correct way. But like you're making an unconscious process conscious always makes you worse and self-conscious, and it's bad for a while. So like you get a little worse to get better. So it's hard work to switch over to it. But when you can reliably say, okay, what are the range of topics that I want to cover potentially in this piece? What do I really want to say? And there's a number of ways you could do it. You know, if you're writing very creative driven, you could look for a hook or a story or something, and then say, okay, and like if it's nonfiction and you want the person to be able to get a lesson, okay, what's the lesson? What's the takeaway? What's the gestalt? Or you could just list out a bunch of unrelated things and just see, okay, which of these kind of fit or not, and then kind of put them in a structure. And then you write and you edit, and those are both skills that can be developed. Likewise, writing has a bunch of skills involved, right? So there's the quality of your sentences, there's the cadence of them, there's your word choices. And I contend this is true in just about every field. Every field that I've looked into, there's always these like micro skills that if you look at the people that are really killing it, that are improving their craft all the time, there's always something. Right. So I did a little bit of fencing at one point, with like swords, right? You don't call them swords in fencing. It's kind of gouache, but like swords. And like it's all footwork and like little tiny finger movements. It's not these like big like pirate swinging a sword around thing. It's very like subtle, right? So you can work on exactly how you move your back foot and then your front foot on a retreat for like a little half of a step. And you can just like work on that for 3 hours and get a little bit better. And I see this is true in all sports, and I see this is true in entrepreneurship, where you can like look at your financials, and you can look at like the messaging of your offer, and you can like look at your price points, and you can look at the delivery and the customer service, and you can take it apart. And I think a lot of times creative people resist doing this because their intuition is so good, right? And their creativity and their magic is so good that sometimes it outputs something really, really great. And then it's uncomfortable to go into a zone of ambiguity and unpleasantness, and I don't know what the heck that I'm doing. Which when you're learning the method of analytically breaking things up, right, to do them sequentially or to work on them in pieces, it's just unpleasant until you learn it and then, be able to trust and have confidence in that process. Once you do, it's actually very freeing and very liberating, where you can say like, all right, like this doesn't open strong enough. Like it just takes too long to get to the main point. Is this like written poorly on a technical level, or is this just like a bad story when I reread it? Do I need to rip this out and do something else? So once you have that mechanics level understanding, it's similar to like, a boxer that learned not through training, but just like kind of figured it out. Like the coach can say like, hey, you're lifting your foot in the wrong order, you're going to get knocked out. Right. But he or she doesn't know that.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting when you're saying that. I was thinking about snowboarding. A friend of mine who's an avid snowboarder was just here at my apartment on Saturday night, and I was telling him, I said, there's one thing that I have yet to be able to do, and it's hit jumps. And I'm at a point where I'm 38, so I'm not going to be doing 50-foot jumps, because if I break a bone, I'm not going to heal. But I asked him, I said, what's the key? And I said, and where do people, go wrong? He said, well, here's the thing. He said, people who try to hit jumps initially on snowboards, what happens is that the minute they are in the air, their whole body posture changes, which causes them to eat shit. And I was like, so you're telling me that I'm going to have to eat shit a few times? He said, probably. But he said, what happens is at a certain point, you learn not to freak out when you're in the air, and you just land.
Huh. Makes sense. Yeah. No, that's a great metaphor. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
That's a great metaphor for technique improvement. You get on a new technique, right? And then you're like, I can't handle this. And so you like wipe out.
Yeah.
But like, you just try it. Like if a lot of professionals use that in your field, then there's probably something there than just like schedule 1 month of practicing on it. I gave myself a month of training on that, on that method, which I was pretty sure was correct. And I also said when I stopped writing for a while to like try to get better, I don't necessarily recommend this, but I've been doing it for a long time. And I said I wasn't going to start re-releasing until I had a 2-month backlog. So I write an essay every week at the Strategic Review. People really like it. And I said I was going to wait till I had 8 of them to get started. So then I had 8 weeks. That's the most tactical piece of feedback that I have for people that are creative, which is have backlog. So you can have 3 bad weeks in a row and not wipe out, right? Like just, you just can't. Some days you just can't make something great before tomorrow. Just not always possible. And having backlog just is like, it's such a sanity quality of life enhancer. And like, I look for 2 months.
Yeah.
And that means I can have a bad 5 weeks in a row and be okay, which is great. Because I never have a bad 2 months in a row. Do you know what I mean? Like
Right,
crazy 3 weeks followed by 2 weeks of healing, followed by, okay, I got 3 weeks to build the backlog back up.
Yeah. You know, the other thing I was thinking about in terms of system is kind of how they free sort of the conscious mind to actually do work, because, you know, if all your effort is focused on the process itself, of trying to figure out how am I going to sit down and write, how much am I going to write, you know, whatever. I mean, and we're just using writing as the sort of context for this example. But if you're having to think about every one of those things every day, that's like, you know, cognitive bandwidth being directed towards, you know, probably the lowest value things that occur out of your creative output. As opposed to, you know, saying that all of this stuff is predetermined, like what time, how much, you know, for how long. Basically what you're freed up to do then is actually come up with real insight, is sort of the revelation that I had this morning.
Yeah. Have you heard of the story of Buridan's ass like donkey, Buridan's donkey?
No.
So I think it's the Aesop fable. It's really old. It's like this donkey that is very, very thirsty and very, very hungry, but equally thirsty and hungry. And he is exactly halfway between a pail of water on his left and some hay to eat on his right. And because he's exactly halfway, he turns to one, but then he wants the other one just as much. So he looks at the hay, like, no, but I want the water, and turns back and just keeps doing that, and then dies of hunger and thirst.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of creative people do that because they have too many things going on, and they're not like, today I'm just doing X. Mm-hmm. And they're just like, all right, I'm doing X. Like, I'm waking up and I'm spending 3 hours on my writing. Could be word count, could be hours. I've seen people use both. Yeah. And then you just sit there and you do that until it's done, or you suffer, but you don't do anything else, right? And right. You just do that, and that's it. And then you succeed. And like that, publication schedule, production schedule, whatever, and backlog, and you're good. That's it. That's the game.
Yeah, it's you know, I wrote this piece the other day that I haven't published yet, titled "Simple but Not Sexy," and that's exactly what that is. It's simple but not sexy, you know. And I think often people, you know, in my mind, when people are looking for something sexy, it's just a form of resistance. It's kind of like, okay, you know, you listen to people in a writer's workshop, and they'll ask a dozen questions that have nothing to do with writing. And you're like, none of those things are going to make the difference that you actually sitting down and writing will.
Yeah, I got something neat for you. Maybe your listeners will like. I just finished a book on audio, and it's pretty good. I think if you do the first 3-4 chapters, you got the idea. The rest of it's fine, but like 3 chapters is enough. Which was How Bad Do You Want It? Mm-hmm. It's about endurance sports, and this guy's big idea. He's a sports psychologist. This guy's big idea is that perception of effort and the ability to produce more effort when you think you can't, and like produce through pain, is what makes a good endurance athlete. Because he studied a bunch of studies and such, and nobody produces like near their body's limit at any given time. And an elite athlete might get 85 or 90% of their body, but they always have more, right? And there's a bunch of examples of this. One of the things that was really just game changing once I went through this and started applying it is challenging myself of like, all right, if I used to be only able to write when I'm inspired, can I write when I'm feeling only pretty good, right? Then can I write when I'm feeling exactly neutral? And then can I write when I'm feeling a little slightly bad, right? And just challenging myself to like, how do I produce? And like learning. And I actually think it's a skill to be able to produce when you're not feeling that great. And it's a skill that has like different mechanics, right? It'd be kind of like, you know, if you got a little bit of an injury in a sport where you can kind of play around it, you might not be able to do the same moves. Right. The same thing when you're inspired and you hit flow state, and, it's kind of when the skill meets the difficulty level exactly is the, Mahali's, kind of definition of flow state, and its time disappears. Like, that's great. And that's easy. Right. And then getting to being able to produce when you're neutral, like, that's pretty cool. If you can make progress when you're neutral, then if you can get up, be in a bad mood, be a little bit sick, be a little bit uncreative, and be like, all right, what do I need to do? I need to write an opening to this. Okay. And what Hemingway say, right? One true sentence, right?
Yeah.
I think Hemingway said that. But that ability to train, and I do see it as training, mental training, practice, to produce when you're not feeling great. And it's like a commitment. It's not like tomorrow this will work. It's give it a month, give it 3 months. And then you get you're going to get a month older in the next month anyways, right? So like if this is important to you, and this is making a cold call, this is developing your product, this is programming an open source thing, this is building a business, this is painting, this is writing, this is kind of everything. Because like, hey, like our moods are kind of distributed, right? We have kind of like a bell curve of moods. Most of the time we're going to be feeling like mostly about average, and half the time we're going to be feeling a little below our average, right? So like the ability to produce when you're like, say, from your 20% and up, which means like 5-6 days a week, you're able to produce something pretty good. Mm-hmm. I think that's cool when you can get there.
Yeah, definitely. Having been exposed to sort of the wide array of people that you've been exposed to, and sort of the length of time that you've, had all these different entrepreneurial endeavors, I am curious why we see such a vast gap in performance and results from people, and what accounts for that, and more importantly, how do you change it?
Yeah, it's interesting. You want to get a little more specific? You want to give me like a couple of examples of people?
Well, I guess the sort of
anonymize them. Let's not call them out.
No, let's not call anybody out. But I mean, I think really what I'm alluding to is sort of the vicious cycle of personal development where people, make all these efforts but don't get any results, and then you've got this like one group of people who just produces astounding results. And like trying to answer that question has like kept me searching for it for the better part of a year or so.
I got a boring, unsexy answer for you if you want it.
I do.
I think most people, first off, don't do enough planning.
Yeah.
Right. So, the simplest version of a weekly review is 3 questions. So what's really going on? One, what's really going on? 2, so what do I do about it? 3, what matters, what doesn't? Mm-hmm. And if things are going swimmingly, those questions are what's really going on? Really, I like the word really in there. What's really going on? So you're like honest with yourself of like, yeah, I'm working a job I don't really like. I'm kind of burning out and I wish I was doing X. Okay, so what do I do about it? Second question, right? Like, man, I really need to like either start taking my more seriously or change jobs or X, whatever. And then what matters, semicolon, what doesn't. I think that goes a long way, because I think the first thing is that people don't necessarily keep their eyes on what's really important. If you sit and at the best level of your ability, you can say X is important to me. I don't have a good enough social circle. I don't have good enough mentors. I don't have good enough friends. I got to go meet more people. Okay, maybe that's the most important thing. Like I'm doing like mediocre quality work in a field that's important to me, but like it's just not good enough. Like I need to improve my craft. Okay, that's the most important thing. Like I want to build a business, but I don't know. I know I want to build a business, but I don't know what field. Okay, like you got to go check out markets and like see what problems you could solve and get to know the people in different fields and see which one you want to make a go of it in. Right. So like knowing what's most important. And I think you need to do this at least weekly, but I mean monthly, quarterly. Mm-hmm. But like some people go years without like asking what's really important. Then I think you need to do what's important every single day for at least 10 minutes. That's actually my bar, 10 minutes. I don't think projects fail. I don't think people don't build a business or don't make art because they, should have put in 100 hours this week and only put in 30. Mm-hmm. I don't think that happens. I think people put things on the shelf. Or they say, I'll get around to it. And it's like, get around to it right now. Go put 10 minutes in. I think the eventual target you want to hit is at least 2 hours in the morning of like most important important work. Mm-hmm. And then another 2 hours in the afternoon. That's only 4 hours. Everybody I know that does 4 hours on like whatever's most important every single day is very successful. Mm-hmm. And you replan weekly and sometimes you're wrong and you go down a rabbit hole and it doesn't work or whatever. And that's fine. That's part of the game. But as long as you do 10 minutes, you've got a placeholder in your life and things keep moving forward and you keep looking at it. It's when you take 2 weeks off, suddenly things are getting dusty. You're going to have to reorient to the problem space. You don't remember what you're going to do. If you reached out to some people, hey, you kind of sort of interested in this, and you take 2 weeks to reply to them, they're not interested anymore. You do 10 minutes. Okay, what's most important? Man, I really should reply to that guy in this space. I wrote to him. He's very gracious to write back. I should reply. It's been 2 days, right? You put in your 10 minutes. I really think, I actually don't think it's possible for a person, in a modern, Western country that's like doing reasonably okay, right? Like to put in 10 minutes a day on what's most important and repick what's most important and stick with that. Not like working hard, but like most important. That will grow. Like if you just reliably do 10 minutes, you'll do more than 10 minutes really quickly. And once you get up to a couple hours or more, like you do that, you're going to be pretty successful. You're going to at least be more successful every single year than the year you were before. If you're picking at all correctly what's most important, which you can learn and improve at that too. and then putting the time in. And people just get busy and don't do what's important, and then they just don't get what they want.
Wow. Well, I have to ask about your reading habits, because you've alluded to so many different books throughout our conversation, and so many different people. I'm curious, if you were to recommend one book or a series of books that have profoundly influenced your life to our audience, what would they be?
Musashi by Eiji Yoshikawa. Really easy. Musashi, Yoshikawa. About the greatest swordsman in Japanese history, historical fiction, brilliant. Everyone should read it. Like, you're not allowed to be in my social circle if you don't get around to reading it pretty quickly.
I'm going to order it on Amazon right after this.
Yeah, you got to read it. Well, otherwise we can't do another one of these. No, it's amazing. It's so subtle and wonderful, and you want to learn about quitting and toughness and harshness and like what happens when you're like a little bit of a bad person, how your life goes all the way down when you're stubborn versus not stubborn, and like getting in your own way versus not. It's not going to give it 100 pages. Some people don't love how it opens, so give it like 100. I like how it opens, and some people love it. This has an extremely high rate of becoming the favorite book of people I know, people that are creative and driven, because it's really about how to harness raw talent, where you're really spinning your wheel, getting in your own way. And there's these two characters that it starts on a battlefield. They were on the losing side of a battle. I'm not ruining much. These two childhood friends, they were teenagers. They went to fight in a war, and they wake up on the battlefield, samurai era, towards the end of the Japanese civil wars in the 1600s, late 15s, early 16s, I think. And they wake up from it, and they like go different routes on actualizing their talent. You see how it plays out over their lifetimes, and it's like, wow. Like the mental models and the character study and the like the little tiny mistake that you didn't even notice somebody was making, like really biting them hard, like 100 pages later. And it's like, yeah, that does happen in real life, doesn't it? There's a lot of those. It's incredible. It's also barbar. It's like a ton of sword fighting, and it's like a really great adventure story too. So it's not a boring fight through a book. I can't recommend it highly enough. Musashi by Eiji Yoshikawa.
All right, we'll definitely add that to our reading list for this month as well. This has been mind-blowingly cool, as I expected it would be. So I have one last question, which I'm sure you've heard me ask. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
I think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable. I think you want to never lose the spirit and the reason you got into it, because there's a lot of details. There's a lot of technical points that sooner or later you need to master. Right. But I think you got to keep going back to that well, and really try and want to do something special. And whether that's business or art or whatever, I think everybody, has some kind of raised on, like some really like the, like why you got into it in the first place, why you got so excited about it. And that can get lost and bogged down. Once you're actually having some success and you're working the mechanics. So I'm big on the systems and the mechanics and the habits and the discipline and all that and the craft. But then like, why am I doing this? Like, why am I on this podcast? Like, why am I writing? Like, why am I putting this thing up? Like, what's the point? And that's what gives you the fuel to keep getting better and to do more of it. And it's like, why am I writing this thing for Medium? Mm-hmm. Why am I writing a book? Because like things get hard and suck. Like look, being human is like, there's like a hard and sucking component of being human in everything, not just everything worthwhile. And like all the stuff that's not worthwhile too has a hard and sucking component. People just like, you know what I mean? Like it's there's a hard and sucking component, and like a lot of worthwhile things do have that too. And when you're like, oh man, I don't really want to balance the accounting. I got a story. I think this is a true story. Maybe it's apocryphal, but I think it's true. Where I think it was President Lyndon B. Johnson went to NASA, and he saw a guy that was like the tidiest, fastest janitor he'd ever seen in America. This guy was just like cleaning, like precisely, very focused in the moment, like almost like an art form. And he says to him, President Johnson, LBJ, says to this gentleman that's the janitor, is like, excuse me, I just noticed you're like working as hard as I've ever seen anybody work on that. And he looks at him and he says, I'm putting a man on the moon. And it's like, that's really cool. Like, that's really cool. So like when you need to do janitorial, right? When you need to sweep your own floor, when you need to sit down and do accounting, when you need to say, I got to get better at outlining, I need to produce on a schedule, I need to wake up earlier before work so I can do my creative work or whatever. Like, just like, why am I doing this? And like connecting with that. Not all the time. Some people like think too much and like don't take enough action. But like once things are really moving, that's what'll give you the juice to work a little bit harder, to polish a little bit more, to improve your craft a little bit more, to put a little bit more time in, to promote what you're doing a little bit more, to get the word out, to just keep leveling up your game, to do a little bit more research, to refine your pitch a little more, to do another round of practice, to just keep putting in those reps, and just keep making things better and doing more of them, which is where really kind of special, unmistakable things come from.
Wow. Well, I am really, really glad that we got a chance to bring you back for round 2, because this has just been fantastic. I can't thank you enough for coming back. This has been amazing.
It's a pleasure. You're one of the most fantastic interviewers I know, and I know how hard you work. I know how hard you work behind the scenes. You're all casual and like we're hanging out and having a good time. I know the amount of work that's going on unmistakably behind the scenes. And it's a joy. You're one of the best interviewers I know, and it's always a pleasure to be here. And I still get random emails and Twitter comments about the interview we did 3 years ago. Like it's never more than a couple months passes before I hear from somebody that I don't know saying, "Dude, I checked this thing out you were on, and it's amazing." It's thanks, Srini. This is great.
I really appreciate that, and I think that makes a fitting way for us to wrap up our conversation. And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that. Next time on The Unmistakable Creative.
There are a couple of realities that I think I've learned over the years, having worked with lots of adolescents who are at career decision points. One of the things I've learned is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. That's number one. Number two, one of the most humbling experiences that I've had was actually working with the child of people who are experts in giving other people advice about how to parent their children. And I think that just illustrated to me how hard it is to parent and how hard it is to find the exact right thing. Mm-hmm. But I do think that a sincere conversation and an honest conversation with a certain amount of seriousness about the serious implications, but also lightheartedness about the fact that in this day and age, any career that you're choosing up front is not necessarily the career that you're going to be stuck with. And I really believe that it's more about connecting with who you are and then manifesting that in a series of jobs that may or may not fulfill you, and to tinker along with that process until you find something that truly resonates.
Srini Pillai joins us to talk about the neuroscience of goals.